At 15 seconds, guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. We have a liftoff. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
The progression of space exploration from the 1960s to the present day are some of humanity's greatest achievements. The International Space Station is the pinnacle of mankind's continuous quest to survive beyond Earth's atmosphere. Because of the ISS, not only have we learned how to make space flight better, but we've improved life and technologies on Earth. We have had significant advances in the fields of science and technology, many more jobs, and better relations with other nations. None of this would have been possible without the communication of former enemies. This is countries, experts, and astronauts united. World War II significantly changed how, when, and why we have the ISS. The Soviet Union and the US were allies as they fought against Germany and Japan. Meanwhile, the US, Soviet Union, and Germany were each secretly developing nuclear weapons, and there was a lack of communication even between allies for these developments. The war ended in 1945 when the US used 2 of their new bombs on Japan. With the end of the war, the Western world was putting itself back together again. When the war ended, so did communication between the Soviets and the US. During the war, Germany became the global expert in rocket development. The US and the Soviet Union both attempted to acquire the experts, scientists, and other valuable resources from the defeated Germany's rocketry program. With the race for scientists and the tensions from mutual nuclear annihilation, the Cold War began. But these 2 things weren't the only cause of increased tensions and halted communication between the 2 nations. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched the world's first satellite called Sputnik. This was the start of a 12-year race between the US and the Soviet Union called the Space Race. This race further halted communication between them. 4 months after the launch of Sputnik, the US launched their first satellite into orbit called Explorer 1. 3 years later, in April of 1961, the Soviets launched the first person into space, named Yuri Gagarin. The following month, the US launched their first person to space, Alan Shepard. With these milestones complete, the US was to go to the moon.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
The US wanted to land a man on the moon by the end of the 1960s. The Soviet Union had other plans. As NASA's lunar program progressed, the Soviets decided it wasn't worth it to land a man on the moon. The Soviets' goal was to build an orbital research laboratory. This idea was more beneficial to them than a moon landing. With an orbital station, research can be conducted that is impossible on Earth. Their first attempt taught them how to better improve their station design so they could build larger, more permanent stations in the future. NASA had exceeded Kennedy's goal though. NASA landed Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on the moon in 1969. The US won the race to the moon, but the Soviets won the race to build a space station. During the 1970s, NASA developed the Space Shuttle program, the first reusable space launch system, which would enable the US to take large payloads to orbit. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union had matured their space station technology. In 1984, President Reagan set a national goal.
Tonight, I am directing NASA to develop a permanently manned space station and to do it within a decade. The space station will permit quantum leaps in our research in science, communications, in metals, and in life-saving medicines which can be manufactured only in space. We want our friends to help us meet these challenges and share in their benefits. NASA will invite other countries to participate so we can strengthen peace, build prosperity, and expand freedom for all who share our goals.
Reagan set a goal to build a station, but what made this announcement significant was the inclusion of other nations in its development, planting the seed for communication. In 1986, the Soviet Union launched the station Mir. At the time, the Cold War had calmed down significantly, and the station hosted many international visitors. The Soviet Union began communicating with some other nations again. In the late 1980s, tensions began to ease as the totalitarian parts of the Soviet system began to dissipate because of their new leader, Mikhail Gorbachev. On January 29, 1998, many senior officials from 15 different countries met. They each signed their agreement to participate in the space station program. This laid out a structure and framework for cooperation between countries. Each country had their own jobs and responsibilities. The US was the leader of the program, but the Soviet Union, now Russia, also played a huge role in the construction and development towards the station. The Cold War was over. The station would be launched in segments as there was no rocket large enough to launch one massive station. The newly developed Space Shuttle now had a new mission to help launch station segments to the orbiting construction site. The design of the station also gave NASA headroom to develop future projects. Over the span of 15 years, most of the station was launched and assembled. The reason so many countries have been involved with the station is because of the ability to test and experiment in zero gravity, which cannot be simulated on Earth. Early critics of the program argued that the ISS would be way too expensive and the money could be better spent elsewhere. And with NASA's budget changing with each president, the ISS takes a $4 billion chunk out of NASA's current annual budget of $23 billion. The price paid could be spent on other projects like building more rovers or telescopes, but the price we have paid for the ISS has not only benefited spaceflight in revolutionary ways, but the advances created from the ISS have translated to Earth. The ISS has also created many new jobs. Many private companies such as Boeing, Rocketdyne, and SpaceX helped build and maintain this station today. When the Space Shuttle program was retired in 2011, Russia was left as the sole source for transportation to and from the ISS. Private companies like SpaceX have been developing technology that allows the US to rely less upon Russia. Even though political tensions may escalate between the US and Russia, both space agencies continue to work together for their mutual benefit. Because of great communication, we have the ISS, and because of the ISS, we have learned many things that have improved life on Earth. We've developed better eye surgery equipment and better vaccines. We've been able to monitor water quality and grow high-quality protein crystals. This may not have been possible without the collaboration and unity with other nations, as the ISS is too expensive to construct and run singularly. Dr. Albert Holland is a NASA psychologist for astronauts on the station.
As we've had some successes, we can point to the ISS and we can say this is a successful, largely, hugely successful international project. I think that we've come a long way in terms of overcoming cultural differences and understanding one another's different histories. Different cultures have different approaches and they have different tools. And so our differences really currently still exist in terms of how do you deal with a particular thing? How do you best address a particular thing? What's your selection of tools? Why do you use this approach and this tool? Why not the way we do it? And so that's where there's more of a negotiation and there's more of a learning from one another, and I expect that will continue.
A reference guide NASA put out in 2010 about the station said, quote, "Advancing our knowledge in the areas of human physiology, biology, and material and physical sciences, and translating knowledge to health, socioeconomic, and environmental benefits on Earth." All the agencies are unified in their goals to apply knowledge gained through the ISS research in human physiology, radiation, material science, engineering, biology, fluid physics, and technology, enabling future space exploration missions, end quote. We have many benefits from the communication that built the station, and it continues to be a source of international communication as well. The ISS has resulted in greater unity and communication between global superpowers that were once bitter enemies. As far as space exploration goes, we've barely dipped our toes in the infinite ocean of space.